This is Ray Stokes from Fort Worth, Texas, with the Texas College of Osteopathic Medicine. I'm in the special collection section of the library there in Fort Worth. Today I have the pleasure of being some 350 miles from Fort Worth in Borger, Texas, and I'm in the home of the great-granddaughter of the founder of osteopathy, Dr. A.T. Still, Andrew Taylor Still. She is living in Borger, Texas, and has lived in Borger, Texas for about 56 years. Her name is Mrs. Aldeen Surface. She was a Cowgill, which is her maiden name. And we're happy to be in her home this morning on the 3rd of April, 1990. I say we because I have with me a very distinguished professor of the Texas College of Osteopathic Medicine, Professor Emeritus, Dr. Charles Ogilvie. He's living now down in Ben Wheeler in East Texas. He came with me this morning to Borger, and we are delighted to have the opportunity to visit with you, Mrs. Surface, Aldeen, if we can call you Aldeen. And I'd like for Dr. Ogilvie to introduce himself by discussing a matter or two that he has with you.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Ray. I'm deeply appreciative of the opportunity that you have afforded me to be here today with Mrs. Surface. And we have had some little preliminary conversations here, and we have been discussing some of her relatives that may afford us some future contacts. And I believe you said that you had living cousins. Are they from your husband's brothers?
They're from my side of the family. They're my grandmother, Marusha Still Cowgill.
Yeah.
Her children. She had 9 living children, and the majority of them lived in East Kansas, around Baldwin, where my grandfather dedicated the land to the college at Baldwin. And then I have a cousin in Reno, Nevada, and one close to Palm Springs, California.
Mm-hmm. What is the name of your cousin in Reno?
His name is Alfred Tennyson Cowgill.
How do you spell the last name?
Cowgill.
Oh, and you pronounce it?
Yeah, we pronounced our side of the family pronounced it Cowgill.
Cowgill.
Mm-hmm. Instead of Cowgill.
Instead of Cowgill.
I see. And then, what is the name of the one in Palm Springs?
It's George William Cowgill, or Cowgill, whichever.
Mm-hmm.
And then, as I said, the majority of the cousins live in eastern Kansas, around south of Ottawa. One he died recently, but he lived at Princeton. And the rest of the cousins, I don't know. But there's quite a few of them in eastern Kansas.
What information do you recall at all? Did you ever see your grandmother, Marusha?
Oh yes.
Well, and what do you recall? What do you recall about her?
Well,
some of her traits, characteristics, or
she was a little short, dumpy person, and that's about all I remember about her. Of course, we visited them regularly.
About how old were you when you first remembered visiting her?
Oh, I imagine I was 6 or 7 years old.
Uh-huh. Well, you ought to be able to remember that pretty well. What was she a good cook?
Yes, as far as I can remember, she was. But and they visited us when my father was alive and had a practice at Kiowa, Kansas. They visited us there.
Now, was he a physician?
He was an osteopath. He graduated in 1905 from Kirksville.
Now, that's your father.
Yes.
And what was his given name?
Henry Rutherford Cowgill.
Mm-hmm.
And he graduated, as I said, in 1905.
From Kirksville?
Mm-hmm.
Now, was that the at that given time, Dr. Charles Ogilvie, was that at that time were the two schools of osteopathy in
I
Kirksville?
believe there was just one in 1905. That was the American School of Osteopathy.
Mm-hmm. I see.
I remember that.
Right.
And he stayed with an uncle, lived with an uncle while he was in school, which would have been a brother to Dr. A.T. Still.
Mm-hmm.
And it was George Still, I believe, that he lived with.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was a surgeon.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Well, do you recall? You were saying your father, what he graduated in 1905. Where did he go to practice? And where did he practice? In what city?
First, was in Garden City, Kansas, in
Garden City.
1905, and that was where I was born.
Oh, well, what year were you born then?
1905.
1905.
I don't know what I can show you.
Let's see, who are we talking about? We're talking about, what is her name? Let's put her on tape.
Tiki.
Tiki? What kind of a cat is she?
She's a Himalayan.
A Himalayan. About how old is she?
She's about 5 years old.
About 5 years old.
She likes microphones.
Yeah, she
She's
likes
a
microphones.
microphone. She wants to be on tape.
Yeah.
She wants her part.
Mm-hmm.
Come on, Tiki.
Okay, now, and your father practiced how long? When did he pass away?
In, when? I can't remember.
Well, how long were he and your mother married? Do you remember that?
I was trying to. I can't remember what he
How
died.
did they meet? Do you recall how he
They
met your
met
mother?
in school.
And what
And
school?
she was studying too. And she liked 6 weeks of graduating when she married. And
That's fine.
so that stopped her education right there.
I see. I understand.
But she was
Now, how many children how many brothers and sisters do you have?
none.
Oh, you were the only?
I'm the only child.
You're the only child.
Mhm.
Well, then you are the end of that particular
I
segment of the
certainly
family,
am.
aren't you?
Uh-huh.
You really are. Uh-huh. Let's go back to some of the visits that you may have made. Where were you? How far away were you living from Marusha, or your grandmother
was
at the
growing
time
up?
when you were growing up? You were growing up in Garden City, Kansas.
No, I grew up in Kiowa.
Kyle.
Uh-huh.
And how far is that from Garden City? Or how far is that from where your grandmother lived?
Well, that was right a mile from the Oklahoma line,
Mm-hmm.
and they lived at south of Ottawa, Kansas, close to the eastern line of Kansas.
I see.
I don't know how far it'd be. It'd be at least 400 miles or more.
More than a day's journey in those days.
Yes, yes.
That's right.
Considerably.
What type of mode of transportation did you use?
Trains.
Trains. Well, there was a train direct line?
Went to Kansas City, I know that much, and I think we took a spur from there to Ottawa, or maybe it went through Ottawa.
Was that the Missouri, Kansas, Texas? Or,
No, it's Santa Fe.
Santa Fe. Santa Fe Railroad. And you don't recall any of the stories that you heard your grandmother tell about her father, A.T.?
She never spoke of him that I can remember. Of course, I was young. I wasn't interested in things like
Well,
that.
I understand that, sure.
But
after you, when did you find an interest in doing a little tracing of the Still side of the family? Were you married at the time, or did you do that before you were married?
I had these original photos. What I should have done when I had that photo made, there was a doctor in Amarillo that wanted that picture.
Mm-hmm.
And in the meantime, it had been broken into several pieces. And I took it to a photographer in Amarillo, and that picture that I gave you is oil painted. It's a hand-painted picture.
Let's talk about that. I'm looking at the picture that you kindly gave us about 10 years ago, that you sent down by a friend who was a patient of a doctor at Hawkins, Texas, which is close, just close to Dallas, Dr. Reuter. And this patient, who was a friend of yours by the name of Babe, and I can't think of what her name was then. Parker, Babe Parker, that's right. She was kind enough to bring, I'm looking at the picture of Dr. Reuter and Babe Parker holding this picture of Dr. A.T. Still, and then here's, of course, is a copy of the picture that I have the pleasure to present to you this morning of Dr. Still, and this was taken, they call him the Whittling. I mean, it's known, he had so many pictures. He must have been photographed 100 times at least, in different poses. And this particular one's the only one that I have, 1904, I believe is what's dated on it, where he's sitting there with his knee crossed, whittling on a piece of wood. It was, in those days, I believe the art of photography, he was taken in black and white and then hand colored into color, and it looks real good.
Well, now, I don't know
where did you get the picture? Do you recall how you got a hold of the picture that we now are so happy to have?
Well, I don't know. I was trying to think. It must have been in some literature that my father received from the college, and he also
from the college. Now, which college would that be? Kirksville.
Kirksville.
I see.
And he also had a bust of my grandfather.
Mm-hmm.
And
what happened to the bust?
Well, little old kid that I went up storming upstairs to his office just as mad as I could be, and I slammed that door open and knocked that bust to the floor and broke it in a million pieces. So that was the end of the bust.
That was the end of the bust, huh?
But now that picture, I don't know whether has there been any more of that type turn up. I should have had that copyrighted because this doctor in Amarillo that I had the picture made for,
I see.
He had a bunch of copies made and sold them at some of the gatherings. I believe there was one in Albuquerque. that he took a bunch of pictures out there and sold to the different doctors.
But as far as you know, the picture that you gave me wasn't original.
A copy of the original.
Oh, it was a copy. It wasn't the original.
No.
Do you know where the original would be today? Would it be at, there is a still museum, a national museum in Kirksville. I wonder if they would have the original copy, or do you know?
They might have an original picture.
Yeah,
I believe they do.
they do.
I recall seeing that, and I'm sure it was in the museum.
I'm
Is,
holding it. Excuse me.
Blanche Laughlin, is she dead?
Yes,
Oh,
but her daughter is living,
uh-huh.
and her name is Mary Jane. Did you ever meet her?
No, I didn't. What's her?
Mary Jane Denslow, but she was Mary Jane Laughlin.
Mhm.
And of course, she is a granddaughter of A.T. Still.
Mhm.
And she is in a nursing home. She's in fair health. She's still very alert.
Mhm.
And
And she lives there in Kirksville.
yes, and I have a snapshot that was taken probably around 1920 that is with her and Marusha, your grandmother, taken in the Laughlin's yard in Kirksville. And Marusha was visiting there, was there for a short visit, and she showed me this snapshot. She was a little girl, little toddler then, and I made a copy of that photograph. And you were describing Marusha earlier. She was short. Sure, I would say she was probably in her maybe late 60s then, and she was quite heavy then, and so Mary Jane is still living in the nursing home in Kirksville.
Now, what relation are they? What cousin? Half cousins or?
Half cousins,
Yeah.
I'd say.
Well, she would be an aunt because
Oh, that's right.
yeah, she would be
She
an
wouldn't be a cousin.
aunt once
Because
or
she's
twice.
a granddaughter and you're a great-granddaughter, so.
Yeah, she's a she always spoke of A.T. Still as granddaddy. She always called him granddaddy, and
Right.
she, of course, knew she was born 1914, I think.
Well, it's on my understanding that my great-grandfather's second family
Well, of course, she's from the second family.
Yes.
Yeah.
didn't care much for my grandmother because she was an original daughter.
Yeah, I
And,
wondered about that.
They weren't very compatible the way I understand it. I think the Laughlins would just as soon not had her in the family.
Well, at
They
least
wanted to be the original family,
yeah, yeah,
and she was first.
Mhm.
yeah.
Right.
That's right.
Right. Speaking of first, or your grandmother Marusha, I am holding this picture here of her that was taken on her 19th birthday, I understand. Or maybe not on the birthday, but she was 19 at the time, I believe the back of the original state mentions. How did you acquire it? Do you recall how you got a hold of the original? You gave me the original a few years ago, and I'm holding just a copy of the picture now. We have the original in our archives there at TCOM. But do you remember how you acquired it?
It definitely came, I would say, with that bus
Mm-hmm.
that they sent the original, that Whittler picture and the picture of my grandmother. I don't know how I got it. They wouldn't have it at Kirksville, so it was evidently given my father from his sisters or brother.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only way I know how that they must have received it.
And you've had it for a good number. You
Oh,
don't
yes.
remember, in other words, how? Dr. Still died in 1917, and of course you were just how old? 12 at that time. Well, you remember that. You didn't go to his funeral.
No,
Any of your family go to his funeral?
no. And that, the publication, the little publication that they put out, I thought, didn't it used to be monthly or something? A little magazine that they used to publish and send out.
You mean there at Kirksville?
Uh-huh.
Well, I'm not quite sure. I'm sure down
It was
through.
the Journal of Osteopathy.
That probably was it, and I sent them a notice of my father's death, and excuse me. Hello.
Okay, now we're ready.
We were talking about you're sending to the Journal of Osteopathy a notice of your father's death in 1924.
Well, my father didn't die until.
Didn't he die in 1924?
Oh no,
Oh, really? Let's see.
no. I moved here in '34,
34.
and
Was he living at that time?
yes,
Mhm.
and
Or was he still in practice?
no, he was injured, and he came to live with me, and he was with me,
Oh, you mean lived here in Borger?
with me.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't in no physical condition to practice.
Uh-huh. How old was he at his death?
He was 74.
74.
So let's see. I think he was born in 1880, I believe. How old would that make him when he died? 70.
My record shows 1876
Was when he was born?
born.
Well,
Mhm.
that's right. Probably.
But the record I have says he died in 1924, but
Oh.
that's not correct.
No.
Well, I'm going to get that corrected because this information came from Kirksville.
Mm-hmm. Then where was he practicing before he became unable to practice?
Kiowa. But let's see, as I say,
Excuse me,
we
how do
went
you spell that Kiowa?
Kiowa.
Kiowa.
It's an Indian
Mhm,
name.
right.
And we came here in '34. I believe he died in '47.
My goodness.
Well, would he have been older than, how old did you say he was when he passed away?
I don't remember.
Uh-huh.
According to that, it would make it 20. It would make him 72.
72. Well, I
That'd
thought.
be about right,
Uh-huh,
wouldn't
yeah,
it?
that's about right.
Yeah. Well, that's
Well, we're getting something corrected here at
that's
least.
right. That's right.
Well, I was talking about sending that notice in, which
Mhm.
I was very perturbed over because they just put the notice that he had expired,
Mm-hmm.
and they didn't say a thing about him being the being the grandson of Dr. Still or anything.
My goodness,
And I blamed that on to the Laughlin side.
I understand. Well, where is he buried?
He's buried here.
Buried here in Borger.
His middle name was Rutherford.
Rutherford.
Now,
Are you?
is that a family name?
I was told he was named for Rutherford B. Hayes.
Oh,
But whether that was so or not,
At least that's
I was
what you've
told.
been told.
Now, what were you told about how he started osteopathy?
Dr. A.T.,
Mm-hmm.
I think she's addressing that question to you.
all right. My understanding was that he became disenchanted with conventional medicine after the death of his first wife and two of their sons. By that would be
Marusha's brothers.
Marusha's brothers, and so he searched around for different alternatives to the practice of that day, and finally came to the conclusion that manipulation offered a better way of treatment.
Mm-hmm.
And that was in 1874, when he was still at Baldwin, or still in Kansas, in that area of Baldwin. Is that the way you understand?
No, that's not the story that was handed down through the family.
We'd like to have your version.
That's right.
Well, of course, he was a physician in the Civil War at Andersonville.
Andersonville, what state?
Oh, gosh, I don't know.
That was in Georgia, wasn't it?
I don't recall.
Andersonville Prison?
Prison.
Yeah. Well, that was
And it was notoriously terrible.
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
Yeah, I've heard of that, yeah. Okay, excuse me,
that
go.
was your grandfather, John W. Cowgill, who was at Andersonville. I
No,
believe.
it was Dr. Still that was a physician at Andersonville.
Oh, really?
Well, we knew he was a physician in the Civil War,
Uh-huh.
but your grandfather was also a physician in the Civil War?
My great-grandfather.
No, but your grandfather.
No, he was a lawyer.
Yes, but he was a participant. He was not a physician,
I see.
but he was a participant.
My great-grandfather,
Mhm.
Dr. A.T. Still,
Right.
was a physician in the Civil War at Andersonville Prison.
All right.
And when he came home, his family took spinal meningitis.
Mhm.
And he lost his whole family except my grandmother, Marusha. And he swore he would never practice medicine again if he couldn't save his own family. And one day, he walked outdoors. He had a terrible headache. And he went out in the yard, and he laid down with his neck across the swing board of the children's swing. And he noticed in a few minutes that his headache was gone. And he started thinking about that and wondering why or what had caused that headache to go away. And he decided that it was the pressure on the muscles and the nerves in the back of his neck that had stopped that pain. Now that's a story that came down through our family of how he started osteopathy, or started thinking along those lines.
Well, now, does the story end there, or does it have another chapter? I mean.
No, that was the story, supposedly, his starting to dwell on why these things happen. And,
That's where manipulation came into
yes,
the picture then.
And that's how come him, and I've seen a picture of him. This man had a huge abdominal, with a large stomach,
Mm-hmm.
and he stopped him on the street And he was examining him on the street, and
street?
they said he did that often. If he saw somebody he thought looked sick, why, he'd just stop them on the street. And he was, according to our family stories, a very, I can't think of the words to describe it.
With eccentric,
Yes, he was very eccentric and a very alone person. He was, as my dad used to say, out of this world.
out of this world.
Just, he was an ethereal figure instead of a human.
Mhm.
Did you ever hear any stories that your grandmother, Marusha, was eccentric or had inherited any of those characteristics from her father?
No, not that I know of. Of course, my grandfather, Marusha's husband, was a staid Englishman, and he, as I say, graduated from law at DePaul University and was admitted to the bar, but he never practiced law. And they bought this farm then near Princeton, Kansas, and they lived there.
How'd he make a living? There on the farm?
Farming.
Mm-hmm. But he had the law degree, but he never used it in practice.
He graduated from DePaul.
DePaul University.
Where did Marusha, did she go to school?
I don't think so, not that I ever heard. She could have.
But you're not aware?
I hardly think so, because she was so young when she married.
Yeah.
Mhm.
She wouldn't hardly have time.
I see.
Have you ever heard anything about your great-grandmother, A.T. Still's first wife,
Her name was Vaughn, wasn't it?
Mary
No.
Margaret Vaughn?
No, I never did hear anything about her.
Then most of your life, actually, then you've been in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
You've been here 56 years, I believe you say.
I moved here when I was 28.
And you're, well, you've told us how old you are then now, haven't you?
Well, yes, I'm 84.
Bless you. Well, you're a very active 84.
I would be if it wasn't for this surgical disability.
Yeah, I understand.
That's a shame.
Yeah, it really is. Then were you, have you been active in community affairs here in Borger? You know, Borger has quite a history itself, although it's not as old
yes,
as osteopathy, but...
One of the Texas Rangers was asked where was the worst boom town in Texas, and he said, well, there weren't any of them at Tea Party, but Borger was the worst.
Right. That's about 1926, wasn't it?
Yes.
Right. Yeah. Well, you came about 8 years later, didn't you?
Yes, it was still a little rough.
Well, yeah, it was very active all the time.
We had several murders after I moved here.
Mm-hmm.
They said the only thing you couldn't get away with was stealing a cow.
Couldn't steal a cow.
No, just leave the cattle alone. You could murder people, but don't steal cattle.
But you couldn't rustle. You couldn't be a rustler.
No.
Huh? I see. Well, now your father, I meant not your father, your husband. Give us a little information about him. What was his background?
Well, he graduated from college and went into professional baseball.
Oh, you did?
And he played baseball for 9 years and stopped and got a job here at Phillips Petroleum Company. And he worked for them until his death, which was 34 years that he worked for them.
Mm-hmm. For Phillips for 34 years. Who did he play for in baseball?
Well, he got as high as Cleveland.
Cleveland. Cleveland Indians. Was what years? Do you remember approximate years that he played?
Oh, it was the early 20s.
Early. Well, would that be before? What was the great famous Cleveland pitcher by the name of Feller?
Bob
Yeah,
Feller.
Bob Feller.
Oh, that
after
was
that.
years after that. He played in, I imagine, around 23, 24.
Oh, he was Babe Ruth's days then.
And it seemed like it wasn't the Cleveland White Sox or something.
No, I don't believe it was White Sox.
Wasn't it?
No, it was Chicago White Sox.
Yeah. Must have been the Cleveland Indians, because I have a picture someplace of the whole team.
Of the whole team. Well, you want to hang on to that. That'd be a collector's item,
Well,
I'm
it
sure.
could be.
Yeah, right. Well, we'd like, excuse me, go ahead, Dr. Abel.
Ms. Surface, I'm interested in your girlhood in Kiowa. I guess all the Indians were gone then, moved to Oklahoma, the Kiowa Indians.
Well, our county seat is Medicine Lodge, and there's a natural amphitheater out there, and that's where the 5 tribes of the Plains signed the peace treaty with the whites. And they enact that every, I believe, 5 years. And representatives from the 5 tribes come to that pageant.
I guess in those early days when your father first went to Kiowa, that was still pretty much pioneer country, wasn't it?
Let's see, we moved there in about 1911. I can remember the first automobile that came to Kiowa. So there was just horses and buggies then.
Yeah, there weren't many automobiles.
No, but it was a thriving little farming community.
How far is that from Kansas City, approximately?
Oh, it's clear
It's a
across
long
the
way.
state. It's
Oh.
At the opposite.
Oh,
It's close to here.
I see.
Kiowa isn't far from here, is
about
it?
200
Wow,
miles.
that's farther than I thought.
Well, but that's still, by today's standard, that's just a 3-hour drive.
It's northeast of here on the main line of the Santa Fe.
Main line.
One of the pastimes was to go down and watch the trains go through. We had 4 a day, 2 east and 2 west. And that was about all the recreation we had, was to go to the depot.
And
and
you're
watch the trains.
referring to something that no longer exists except
That's
on
right.
Amtrak. That's passenger trains, I presume.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, did you get all your schooling in Kiowa?
Mm-hmm. I graduated from high school there. And I lived at home until I married in 34. We moved down.
Well, you have one thing in common with me.
What?
I married in 34.
Oh, mine was January.
Mine was December, so you're a little older than I am.
Just
Right. Yeah, I got married on Christmas night.
oh. Well, mine was,
How did you meet your husband?
Oh, his folks lived on a farm down in Oklahoma, a little ways from my hometown. And it's just, I guess we had barn dances then. Everybody went to a barn dance, and I think I met him there. And it was quite some time after that before we married.
and you were married in 34?
Mm-hmm.
How long has he been deceased?
Since 74.
Since 74. Then you were married 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I've enjoyed a little more married life than you have.
Well,
then. I had 55 recently.
Well, that's great.
And I have 50 coming up this year.
This year, well, are you going to have a 50th celebration?
Well, the kids, of course,
Oh.
want to have a big party, but we think maybe we'll take a little trip somewhere.
Well, good. Dr. Ogilvie has got quite a distinguished career. He's a radiologist professionally, but he's done a lot of work in medical humanities and was with the Texas College of Osteopathic Medicine for about 10 years in that capacity, and retiring last August, I guess it was. And now he has one of these. Tell us a little bit about your setup down at Ben Wheeler, Dr. Charles.
Well, we live on a ranch out in the country, and we've had this place over 25 years. And we have it's a guest ranch, and we have a guest house there, and we have 3 campgrounds. And we have people come and stay with us, and what my wife and I do is we are interested in nature.
Mm-hmm.
And we teach them about nature. We have trails, nature trails, and my wife is, she has training in geology.
Mm-hmm.
She was a geology major in college. And she also has a great interest in wildflowers. So she takes care of the geology and wildflowers, and I've been interested in birds since I was a little kid.
Mm-hmm.
And also, Ms. Surface, have a great interest in Indians
Oh.
and Indian culture,
Mm-hmm.
Indian lore. And we have on our place made some replicas of Indian sites,
Mm-hmm.
sacred sites. And we have a lot of feathers and rocks and things like that.
Mhm.
So we entertain our guests and try to educate them about nature
Mm-hmm.
and about some of our lost values in that way on our place. And we had this past weekend, a week ago, we had 150 Boy Scouts there. So we have a busy life.
Mm-hmm. Well, I can get started now.
Oh.
I was going to get some.
Well, Ms. Service, I noticed that, and sitting here in your living room here on North Main Street, which I understand Robert Ripley once said had the longest main street of any main street in the world, I guess, and his believe it or not. But some people might question that, but that's what Robert said.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, here in your living room, I noticed that you must have an interest in Indians, because I see the pictures and I even see you have a couple of bows here. You have an interest in archery?
I did it one time when I was younger.
Mm-hmm.
We belonged to the National Field Archery Association and to the Texas Field Archery Association. And we made tournaments all over the 3-state area, Arizona, and some in Colorado and Oklahoma and Texas, of course. All over Texas. And I was field governor for this district up here for about 16 years.
I see.
And
About what period are we talking about? The 40s, the 50s?
well, I was 54 when I started in.
Is that right?
And
Well, that's back in the 60s, huh?
35 years. I was in it 35 years.
My goodness.
My goodness.
I'm sure you won plenty of trophies and championships.
I won my class. They were in classes and won my class several times. And one trophy was won for archers over 55. I won that. But I have about 40 trophies, I guess.
You're looking at, speaking of trophies, you're looking at quite a trophy holder here, Ms. Surface. Dr. Ogilvie has run in about, how many, 60 marathons.
Oh.
He's a marathon runner.
Uh-huh.
And has got he got his share of trophies too, I tell you.
I'll bet.
I imagine your husband won his share of trophies too.
Well, sad to say he didn't.
You were better than he was.
Archery is a precision sport. You have to do the same thing exactly the same way every time, or you don't know where that arrow's going to go.
Right.
And he wouldn't stick to one bow and one size arrow. He had about 5 bows and all different sizes and types of arrows. So I was the one that brought home the trophies.
Good for you.
Because I stuck to one bow.
Well, Ms. Service, this has been a real pleasure on the part of Dr. Ogilvie and myself, and sharing these few moments together with you and trying to kind of pick your brain, so to speak, of some of your memoirs of the past. And you are the last of your particular portion of the Still family, and it's been our pleasure to share these moments with you today on the 3rd of April, 1990. Thank you very much.